There are 10,000 ways to die in the 41st millennium, and none of them are merciful. But for me, death is not the greatest fear. My burden is living with the knowledge that at any moment, I may have to kill my own men. That is the truth of being a commissar in the Astra Militarum. To wear the black greatcoat and the peaked cap is not an honor, but a constant sentence. I am the Emperor's well-made flesh, and his mercy does not run through my veins. I remember the first time I felt the weight of this uniform. The crisp cloth, the Aquila badge glinting faintly under the lumen strips, the polished bolt pistol at my side, symbols of authority and judgment. Every guardsman who looks at me knows what I represent. I am their shield against cowardice, their sword against treachery, and their executioner should they falter. The Imperium grants me no luxury of hesitation. Some may think the life of a commissar is one of privilege, rank without report, command without the burden of strategy. They are wrong. Mine is a path of isolation, of watchful suspicion, and of endless vigilance. I stand apart from the men I march beside. They laugh, they curse, they cling to the small comforts of camaraderie. I remain outside, a spectre hovering in the periphery, a reminder that the Emperor's gaze is never far. The regiment I serve with now hails from Valeria Prime, hardy men and women used to ash storms and endless mines. Their lungs are scarred with dust, their hands hardened by years of labor, their eyes dulled by fatigue. And yet, when pressed into service, they march with grim determination. I admire them, though I cannot let admiration cloud my duty. My thoughts often linger on the contradictions of my role. I am charged with preserving discipline, but in doing so I must sometimes extinguish the very spark of humanity that drives men forward. Fear is the lash I wield, but fear alone cannot win wars. Still, the Munitorum does not ask me to inspire love, only obedience. And obedience, no matter how brittle, holds the line against the horrors that assail mankind. When the vox channels fall silent and the guns thunder in the dark, it is my voice that must cut through. Stand fast. Advance. Fire. Orders must be clear, unquestionable, backed by the knowledge that failure means execution. The men obey not because they trust me, but because they know defiance will be met with a bolt round to the skull. That is my power, and my curse. I do not delude myself into thinking I am loved. Commissars are never loved. At best, we are respected. At worst, feared and despised. But it matters little. My loyalty is not to them, it is to the Emperor. Every day I pray for his light to guide me, though the light is cold, and the prayers are often met with silence. Yet I believe, as I must. Faith is the only shield that cannot be taken from me. Even now, as I stand in the mustering hall, the regiment forming ranks under the blare of vox horns and the smell of machine oil heavy in the air, I feel their eyes flick toward me. Some avert their gaze quickly, as though contact with mine might invite judgment. Others hold my stare too long, perhaps daring to test my resolve. They will find it unyielding. A guardsman's life is cheap, measured in the millions, expended like munitions. But my decisions, when I pull the trigger on one of my own, ripple through the ranks like a seismic charge. Each death is a warning, each execution a grim sermon. And though the men hate me for it, they march straighter, aim truer, and stand firmer in the face of terror. That is the paradox of my existence. To save 1,000, I must kill one. As I write these words, I feel the ache of fatigue in my bones, the weight of decisions already made, and the dread of choices yet to come. This world we've been sent to, Vortan's Reach, is a fortress world, though little remains of its former strength. Orcs gnaw at its borders like wolves on a carcass, and whispers of darker threats lurk in the shadows. The Valerian Ninth has been tasked to hold the line, and I, Commissar Kalen Roth, am tasked to hold them. Still with me in the darkness? If this tale chills your soul, strike that like button and subscribe to witness more stories from the heart of the Imperium. The Emperor protects those who support the cause. And so it begins. My story is their judge, their shadow, their constant reminder of the Imperium's will. For I am a commissar, and this is what it is like to serve. The transport ship descended through the choking skies of Vortan's Reach with the groan of ancient engines and the stench of recycled air pressing into every breath. I stood near the forward bay doors, my coat buttoned tight, my cap drawn low. The guardsmen around me clutched their last guns, silent in the dim red glow of the lumen strips. Some whispered prayers, their lips moving soundlessly. Others stared at the floor, eyes hollow from weeks of transit. A commissar does not pray aloud. My prayers remain locked within, spoken in the silence of thought, lest the men mistake my devotion for weakness. Still, I clutched the grip of my bolt pistol as if it were a rosary, a weapon as much a symbol of faith as of power. The descent was rough. The hull shuddered under anti-air fire, dull thumps echoing through the craft as flak bursts clawed at us from below. A lesser regiment might have panicked, but the Valerian 9th remained steady, their discipline a testament to their mining world heritage. They knew pressure, darkness, and death. A storm of steel was nothing new. 3 minutes, the bay sergeant barked, his vox-amplified voice cutting through the din. Helmets on, safety catches off. Helmets clicked into place. Power packs slammed home. Fingers brushed against trigger guards, not squeezing, not trembling, just waiting. Competence. I allowed myself the faintest flicker of satisfaction. These men were not untested farmhands or hive-scum levies. They were soldiers forged by toil. The landing ramp dropped with a scream of hydraulics, and the planet's breath washed over us. Ash-laden winds howled into the bay, carrying the acrid scent of Promethean fires and the copper tang of blood. The ground beneath was a scar of churned mud and shattered ferrocrete. Vortan's Reach had once been proud, bastions of stone, manufactoria spires, and fortified walls. Now it was a graveyard of broken fortifications and smoking craters. We disembarked in formation, boots sinking into the filth, banners snapping in the poisonous breeze. I walked at the side of Colonel Varros, the regiment's commander. He was a broad man, his face lined with both scars and resolve. His vox bead crackled with constant chatter as he relayed orders and adjusted formations, never faltering. He did not look at me as he spoke, but he did not need to. We both understood our roles. He commanded. I ensured his commands were obeyed. The fortress city loomed ahead, or what remained of it. Its walls were pitted with shell holes, its towers reduced to jagged stumps. The Aquila banner still fluttered from the highest ruin, though its edges were scorched and torn. Beyond those crumbling defenses, the orcs were gathering. Even from this distance, I could hear their guttural roars, like drums of flesh and iron echoing across the battlefield. The first inspection came swiftly. As the regiment assembled into companies, I moved down the lines, my eyes sharp, my stride measured. I stopped before one squad, young recruits, their armor still smelling of manufacturer oil. One trembled slightly as my gaze lingered on him. "Name?" I demanded. "Trooper Jorvan, Commissar," he stammered, saluting with a stiff arm. I held his eyes for a long moment. He would either break now or steel himself. Slowly, his trembling ceased. His jaw set. I gave a curt nod and moved on. Sometimes a wordless test is enough. Other times, sterner measures are required. At another line, I found a guardsman with a loose strap on his flak vest. Careless. I fixed him with a glare and reached forward, yanking the strap taut with a snap. "Sloppiness kills, trooper," I said. My voice was calm, not raised. Calm is deadlier than rage. Rage can be dismissed as temper. Calm is certainty. When you fall, your squad falls. Do you understand? "Yes, Commissar." His voice was firmer than before. Good. Lesson learned. Fear teaches quickly. By the time I completed my inspection, the regiment stood taller, more focused. They knew I had seen them, judged them, and would continue to do so. That awareness was my weapon as much as my pistol. As the sun dipped behind the fortress ruins, turning the ash storms crimson, Colonel Varros called me aside. His tone was clipped, his expression grim. "The orcs have been probing the walls for days," he said. "But there are whispers of something else. Patrols go missing in the lower hab blocks. Reports of voices in the dark, strange markings on the walls. Could be nothing. Could be worse. Chaos." The unspoken word hung between us like a knife. I nodded once. "I will watch the men closely," I replied. "If corruption takes root, it will be cut out before it spreads." He met my gaze, and for a moment I saw relief in his eyes. Relief and sorrow. Commanders rely on commissars not because they want us, but because they need us. He bore the burden of leading them into battle. I bore the burden of killing them if they faltered. Between us, the regiment would stand, or die on its feet. The wind howled louder as night fell, rattling broken metal and carrying the faint echo of orcish laughter. It was not the sound of victory, not yet. It was the sound of predators circling prey. I adjusted my cap, my hand brushing the skull insignia. A reminder of what I am: judge, executioner, shadow of the emperor. Tomorrow the men would fight. Tonight, they would rest uneasy. And I would watch them all. Dawn came as a smear of sickly light across the ash clouds, illuminating the fortress ruins in shades of grey and blood red. The Valerian Ninth stood assembled in the parade square, armor dulled by soot, weapons clutched with weary precision. They did not know it, but I watched every movement, every flicker of their eyes, every tremor of their hands. A commissar must always watch. Colonel Varros gave the day's orders with clipped efficiency, his vox bead hissing as he relayed deployments to the company commanders. His words were sharp and clear, but it was not his voice that made the soldiers stand straighter. It was mine. Or rather, the knowledge that if they slouched, faltered, or hesitated, I would notice. I walked the line slowly, the sound of my boots echoing off cracked ferrocrete. A commissar's stride is as much a weapon as a bolt pistol, measured, deliberate, unhurried. It says, I am not rushing, because I am certain. Certainty unnerves men more than anger ever could. One squad caught my eye. Veterans, scarred and grim, yet even among them discipline had softened. A trooper's lasgun hung low against his chest, safety unlocked. I stopped, my gaze boring into him. Step forward. My voice was calm, but it carried like thunder. He obeyed, though slowly. The hesitation was the mistake, not the loose lasgun. What is your weapon status? I asked. He glanced down. Shame flickered across his face. Safety, off, Commissar. I let the silence hang, a noose tightening. Around him, the squad shifted uneasily, waiting for the bolt round they thought inevitable. Finally, I nodded. Correct it. He snapped the safety on with trembling fingers. Now tell me why discipline matters. His throat worked before he answered. Because, the Emperor watches, Commissar. Wrong. I leaned closer, my voice a blade pressed against his pride. Because when you falter, the man beside you dies. When he falters, you die. Discipline is survival. Obedience is the Emperor's shield. Remember that. I turned on my heel and walked away. He would never forget. Nor would the squad. That was the power of a commissar. Execution is a tool, but fear of failure cuts deeper than death. By sparing him, I taught more than a corpse ever could. Yet mercy is not indulgence, it is calculation. A single spared man can bind a squad tighter than 100 punishments. Later, in the command post, Colonel Varros reviewed Auspex readings while the Vox officers tried to cut through the static-laden channels. The orcs had been sighted massing beyond the outer trenches, but it was the strange anomalies in the lower have-blocks that drew my focus. Symbols daubed in blood-red paint. Reports of voices chanting where no soldiers had been posted. Shadows moving against the light. I caught the colonel's eye. Morale is firm, but whispers spread. He grimaced. Superstition. Perhaps, I said evenly. But superstition left unchecked becomes heresy. I will deal with it. That night, I patrolled the barracks myself. Guardsmen muttered prayers under their breath, clutching small icons of the Emperor. I allowed it. Faith strengthens. But when I passed another squad, their voices fell silent too quickly, their eyes too wary. I stopped, letting silence stretch like a wire. Is there something you would share? They shook their heads in unison. Liars. I could smell the fear on them, sharp as ozone before a storm. Yet fear is not guilt. Fear may yet be shaped into courage. I left them with a warning glance, but my mind recorded every face, every gesture. Tomorrow, I would test them again. Still with us in the darkness? Hit that like button if this tale chills your soul. More grim stories from the Imperium await. As I left the barracks, the fortress walls shuddered from distant artillery. The orcs were testing our defenses again. Their crude shells screamed overhead, bursting against stone and rubble. The guardsmen cursed, prayed, or laughed nervously. I simply stood in the open, unmoved. A commissar must never flinch. If a shell takes me, so be it. If not, then the men see their judge unafraid of death. When the bombardment ended, I returned to my quarters. I allowed myself no rest. Instead, I polished my bolt pistol, every motion deliberate, every click of the mechanism echoing in the stillness. The weapon gleamed under the lumen glow, a symbol of the Emperor's justice. The regiment knew that tomorrow, they would march into the fire. And they knew that I would march with them, not beside them, but above them, watching always. For that is what it means to be the Emperor's eyes. To see everything, to miss nothing, to judge without hesitation. The fortress had no night. The ash storms veiled the sky so thickly that even when Vortan's sun dipped beyond the horizon, the world glowed faintly with firelight and smouldering ruin. Sleep was shallow, haunted by the echo of distant orc drums. For the men, it was the waiting that gnawed at their spirit. For me, it was the silence. Silence always hides something. Whispers reached me first through the vox operators. Reports from patrols, strange glyphs scrawled across hab walls where no orc had set foot, half-burned incense sticks, a metallic tang in the air that had no source. At first, the colonel dismissed it as fear sharpening shadows. But fear does not paint symbols in blood. That evening, as the regiment gathered in the mess, the murmurs thickened. Guardsmen spoke of missing comrades, vanishing into the lower levels without a trace. Others swore they heard chanting in the walls, voices that stopped when you leaned closer. I moved through the ranks as they ate, every spoon clattering quieter as I passed. They tried to look away, but fear betrays itself. Superstition breeds weakness, I told them, my voice carrying over the mess hall. But the Emperor does not suffer weakness. If there are whispers of corruption, they will be silenced. If there are traitors, they will be burned. And if fear itself is your enemy, then remember, fear me more. Silence followed, heavy and brittle. The message landed. Their eyes told me so. Later, I summoned Sergeant Harville, a grizzled veteran who had survived 3 campaigns against the orcs. His loyalty was unquestionable, his voice steady even when shells fell like rain. If anyone had the ear of the men, it was him. Rumors spread, I said. What truth lies in them? He met my stare without flinching. Men vanish, Commissar. Not many, but enough. The hat blocks near the old manufactoria stink of death. I've seen the marks myself, not orc work. 2. Deliberate. Chaos. He did not answer, but his silence was enough. That night, I walked the manufactoria ruins with a squad at my back. The air reeked of ash and rust, every shadow stretching long under the sickly glow of lumen torches. And there, scrawled across broken walls, I saw them, the 8-point star, jagged and crude, smeared in blood that had not yet dried. The guardsmen behind me shifted uneasily, lasguns tightening in their grips. I turned, raising my bolt pistol slowly until its muzzle leveled at them. Who among you will confess? My voice was calm, steady, absolute. Their eyes widened, their breath shallow. Silence pressed down like a vice. No one spoke. Then hear me, I continued. If heresy is among you, it will be cut out. If you falter, you will burn. I am not your enemy, but the Emperor's wrath-given form. Betray him, and I will end you myself. I lowered the pistol, holstered it with deliberate calm. The tension did not ease. It was not meant to. The squad dispersed quickly after, but I lingered. My auspex crackled faintly, a static distortion as though the air itself shivered. I traced my glove across the blood mark, smearing it. Warm. Too warm. Whoever daubed it had been here moments before. As I withdrew, I felt the men's eyes on my back, not with trust, but with unease. That suited me. Better unease than complacency. Better fear than corruption. When I reported to Colonel Varros, his jaw tightened. The orcs are massing. We have no time to hunt shadows. Shadows kill faster than orcs, I said. We must root this out. He said nothing more, but I saw the truth in his eyes. He knew. He simply feared that if we named the corruption, it would spread faster. Perhaps he was right. But I could not permit silence. Silence is rot, and rot spreads. As I left his quarters, the orc guns opened fire again. The fortress shook, dust cascading from the ceilings. Guardsmen scrambled to defensive positions, shouting orders, slamming power packs into weapons. They looked to the colonel for commands. But they looked at me to remember who watched. And in the corners of their eyes, I saw it, the flicker of doubt. Were the orcs the only enemy? Or was something worse already among them? Comment your theories below. What corruption stalks our heroes? I knew the answer. But proof would cost blood. The siege tightened with every passing day. The orcs howled at the walls, their crude engines belching smoke, their artillery pounding the bastions with mindless fury. Yet still, I felt the greater danger came not from without, but within. The men knew it too. You could see it in their faces as they marched to the parapets, eyes flicking toward every shadow, every comrade who looked away too quickly. Discipline held, barely. But fear is a patient predator. At dawn, I convened a firing line. 3 guardsmen, dragged from their bunks in the dead of night, stood bound before their regiment. Their crime was not treachery proven, but treachery whispered. They had been seen near the Manufactoria ruins, returning with hands stained red. No one could say whose blood it was. No one dared. The men stared in silence, their breath steaming in the cold. I read no charges aloud, no lengthy accusations. I simply raised my bolt pistol, the weapon heavy with finality. Cowardice, I said. Suspicion. Hesitation. Each is death. And I will not let death spread. 1 shot for each man. 3 thunderclaps. The corpses slumped against the stone, their blood seeping into the frost. The regiment flinched, some turning away, others staring in grim silence. Fear this fate, I told them, holstering the pistol. Obedience is life. The Emperor watches. And so do I. The executions brought silence, but not peace. Later, in the command chamber, Colonel Varros confronted me. You killed men without proof, he said, voice sharp. I killed before proof was needed, I replied. Doubt is a cancer, Colonel. If I let it grow, you'll lose more men to whispers than to orc shells. He pressed his lips thin, but offered no rebuttal. He knew I was right. Or he feared I might be. That night, the fortress shook with a deeper violence. Not orc guns. Something else. The Voxnet filled with frantic voices, reports of an explosion in the lower levels. I raced with a squad down to the hab blocks, last guns ready. The corridors were filled with smoke and the reek of burning oil. Bodies littered the floor, half-charred, their eyes wide in frozen terror. Amid the carnage, I found the mark again, the 8-point star, glowing faintly in the firelight, carved into the stone with a blade hot enough to melt ferrocrete. One of the guardsmen at my side gagged. This isn't orc work. No, I said flatly. This is worship. The realization spread like wildfire. The orcs were not alone. Someone inside our walls had offered themselves to chaos. The signs had been there all along, the vanishing men, the chants in the walls, the symbols. Now, the corruption was no longer hiding. It was making itself known. The squad shifted uneasily, weapons shaking. I turned on them like a predator. Steady yourselves. Chaos feeds on fear. Do not feed it. But in truth, I knew fear was already rooted deep. And I also knew this. The first heretic I uncovered would not face trial. They would face my pistol. Back in the command chamber, Colonel Varros paced, fury etched across his scarred face. The orcs mass at our gates, and now this? A cult in our walls. If this spreads... It won't, I interrupted. I'll see to it. He looked at me, his eyes searching. And if it costs lives? I leaned forward, letting him see the steel in my stare. Then I will pay that cost in full. Outside, the orcs bellowed in the night. Inside, silence spread like a plague. Between the two, I stood, the Emperor's will, the last blade of order in a fortress that threatened to fall from within before it fell from without. And somewhere in the smoke-choked halls, a voice whispered. Not in words, but in a feeling. A promise. It was not the orcs I should fear. It was the traitor already wearing our colors. Comment your theories below. Who has already given themselves to chaos? The fortress walls trembled as another orc barrage landed. Dust rained from the ceiling, sprinkling across the command table like grey ash. Maps of the sector lay spread before us, each marked with symbols that told the same story. Our defenses were collapsing piece by piece. Then the Vox crackled to life. The signal was faint, buried beneath static and interference, but the voice was unmistakable, a commissariat code, encrypted and sealed. Attention. Segmentum command to Fortress Bastion Primaries. Hold the line at all costs. Reinforcements are not forthcoming. Repeat, you are to hold. The Emperor protects. The message cut out, leaving only the howl of the storm outside and the hollow echo of its command. Colonel Varros slammed his fist against the table. They've abandoned us. They want us to bleed out here. I stared at him coldly. They want us to do our duty. If that means dying, then we will die with our boots on, and the Emperor's name on our lips. The Colonel's face darkened, but he did not argue further. He knew the truth, even if he loathed it. The orders meant one thing: we were to become the anvil against which the orcs would break, no matter how many guardsmen it cost. And worse, the whispers of chaos spreading through the ranks now had to be purged even as we faced an enemy 10 times our number. That night, I addressed the regiment in the courtyard. The air was bitter cold, smoke and ash swirling from burning chimneys. Men huddled in their greatcoats, lasguns clutched tight, eyes hollow from exhaustion. "Soldiers of the Imperium," I began, my voice cutting through the night, "the High Command has spoken. Reinforcements are not coming. We are the wall. We are the line. We are the Emperor's shield upon this world." Some shifted uneasily. A few muttered curses under their breath. They were tired of speeches, tired of promises. But I did not offer promises. I offered truth. "Make no mistake," I continued. "The orcs are beasts. They will smash themselves upon these walls. But beasts are predictable. What is not predictable is treachery. What is not predictable is cowardice. And I tell you this, I will kill 10 of you myself before I let one traitor live among us." My words struck like a lash. I saw fear in their faces, but also a grim resolve. Fear could be a weapon, if wielded properly. The next morning, scouts reported the orcs massing for an assault. A warband of gargantuan size, banners waving, drums pounding. Their war cries echoed across the plains. As the regiments scrambled to their stations, I walked the walls, inspecting each squad. Some men saluted stiffly. Others could barely look at me, haunted by the executions I had carried out. Good. Let them fear. Better fear me than the rod of chaos. In the command chamber, Colonel Varros whispered, "If we survive this, it will be a miracle." I adjusted my cap, my hand brushing the grip of my pistol. "No, Colonel. It will not be a miracle. It will be discipline. It will be faith. And it will be the Emperor's will." Then the horns sounded. The orcs were coming. And for the first time, I wondered if the orders from above were not a command, but a death sentence. The horns that rose from the orc lines were like the sound of 1,000 bellies being smashed at once. They rolled across the ruined plain and vibrated through the fortress stone until even the walls seemed to shudder. My men tightened their grips. The trench lights near the parapet threw long, jittering shadows over faces drawn pale and hard with fight. The ash in the air tasted of metal and ozone. Today would be the true test. "Brace," Colonel Varros barked, voice raw through the vox. "Hold the parapets. Let them break themselves." I moved like a blade along the ramparts, inspecting each position with that slow, deliberate step commissars are meant to use as a metronome for nerves. Where a sergeant had failed to emplace a sandbag, I barked corrections and watched the men execute them with instant competence. One knelt, another tied the strap, another heaved the soil into place. Small, efficient motions that turned a ragged line into a living barricade, competence pawn for a world of mud and iron. Below us the orcs were a living mountain, slug gas and chokpar flashing, ramshackle armor plates rattling, a war boss astride a grot-rigged squigboss belching blue flame. Their artillery, crude but numerous, pounded the approach, sending geysers of dirt and twisted metal into the air. In the gaps between thunder, I could hear their guttural laughter and the clank of their engines. They smelled like burnt promethium and old teeth. "Vox to artillery," Colonel Varros snapped. "Fire pattern delta. Aim for the brutes on the left flank. Don't waste rounds on small mobs." The response was crisp. The munition crews had their protocols memorized. A last cannon in the eastern bastion tracked and barked, cutting a gap through a mob of smaller orcs. Its beam seared the night with a sickly white blue that turned the air to glass for an instant. The effect was beautiful and terrible. Discipline and technology made a wall that orc mass could not just bulldoze through, if the men held. A screaming horde bore down the trench approach. For a heartbeat they were a single, chaotic thing. Then the Valerian 9th opened fire. The lasguns barked in disciplined volleys, a lattice of red tracer wash across the plain. I watched the disciplined patterning more than the blood. Training shows in cadence. The men fired not as a mob but as parts of a machine, ammo changes at their posts, Voxlink snapping corrections between squads, medics stationed and ready. That kind of efficiency birthed survivals. An orc knob, huge even for their kind, ran straight for the eastern parapet, hacking a massive chopper. Trooper Jorvan, the boy I had steadied weeks ago, met him. I had seen him earlier, wiping his hands, jaw set with that look I'd taught him to keep. He crouched, calculated, kept his shoulder correct, and squeezed. The bolt round punched through the Orc knob at an angle that threw it from its feet. Clean competence. Jorvan's last gun sputtered smokes, but he did not flinch. I allowed myself the briefest of acknowledgements, a tilt of my cap. He did not look to me for praise. He looked at his fallen foe and then to his squad, and they righted themselves. Then the ground shook in a way that no artillery could explain. A column of corrupted fire erupted from beneath a crater, and from it staggered something half-man, half-rot, twisted banners of chaos streaming like oil. The air went cold and then sour. The 8-point star, the mark I had seen in the Manufactoria, was burned into their armor plates like a brand. The sight seared a new horror into the men. The enemy outside had allies inside. The battle line faced not only Orcish brute force but a vanguard touched by something worse. Close ranks. I shouted, and my voice, magnified by the vox, became a blade that cut through confusion. Men snapped into formation, bayonets fixed, last guns finding targets with renewed precision. Sergeant Harville moved like the veteran he was, shoulder to shoulder with his men, clearing a gap and standing a corporal back up who had nearly crumpled. His hands were quick, his commands crisp, his competence steadied others. It was in these hands, I knew, that my order to purge would be executed without hesitation when the time came. The chaos-bred horrors hit the line with the speed of mad dogs, and we met them with a ferocity that made the Orcs pause. Bolter fire chewed through warped flesh, a flamethrower licked at corrupt banners. Still they came, stubborn and relentless. And as the fight turned into a grinding, close-quarters engagement, I found myself in the crush, not merely as judge but as leader. A squad of corrupted guardsmen, faces twisted into sneers, threw themselves over the parapet. The betrayal tasted like iron. Troops we had warmed with bread and ration smoke now spat nonsense and lunged for blood. I raised my bolt pistol and fired with cold precision at the first one who reached for a friendly's throat. The impact was ugly and necessary. Around me, men who had watched me execute in cold weather did not flinch now. They acted because training had taught them what to do and because fear had been replaced, briefly, with righteous fury. When the smoke cleared, the parapet was a ruin of broken wood and singed cloth. Bodies lay in huddles, Orc, traitor, guardsman. The stench of burning ceramite and charred flesh filled the air. I counted the living with a professional eye, not with sentiment. There were losses. It hurt. It should hurt. But we had held the line. We had bought time. The Orc attack had splintered, vessels crushed, and in their retreat I saw something even more dangerous. Pockets of men moving aside from the main throng, scabbed creatures with that 8-point sign sewn into ragged sleeves. They melted back among the Orc dead like rot among corpses. Chaos, I realized with a cold, sinking certainty, had not only taken men inside our walls, it had co-opted the battlefield. Colonel Varros met me on the rampart, his face white as ash. "We held," he breathed. "At cost." "A cost we will tally," I answered. There was no triumph in my voice. Triumph is for poets and fools. We had lived through a maelstrom because of training and because troopers like Jorvan had been taught to keep their shoulders square. But success did not erase the fact that treachery had walked with us into battle. The blood-marked star had seeped beyond walls and into the mud of our victory. I looked at the men who remained standing. Their eyes were blunt and raw. The executions I had carried out weeks ago tasted both necessary and bitter now. Had those deaths bought this day? Had they only delayed the rot? I could not tell. All I knew was that the test had been passed by some and failed by others. Judgment would have to be meted out in the coming hours, though the artillery still screamed and the Orcs might return in greater fury. Still with us in the darkness? Hit that like if this scene of carnage tightens your jaw. If you want more of the grit and dread of the Imperium, subscribe and steel yourself for what comes next. We tended the wounded, dragged the dead, and sealed the breaches we could. As night fell again, the fortress breathed with pain and exhaustion. I removed my glove and flexed my hand around the grip of my bolt pistol, the same hand that had steadied Jorvan and had ended others. The duality tasted like ash. The war was not merely with Orcs. It had become a war for the souls of my regiment. And I, Commissar Kalen Roth, would be both sword and surgeon. The Emperor's judgment would be precise and unrelenting. The aftermath of the battle left the fortress in a charred, trembling silence. Smoke curled from shattered parapets and scorched habblocks, mixing with the perpetual ash that clung to every surface. The men moved like shadows among the wreckage, dragging wounded bodies to medici stations or stacking the dead for burning. The smell of promethium and iron saturated everything. Death was no longer abstract. It coated the ground, thick and unrelenting. I patrolled the battlements at first light, boots crunching over debris, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Even in victory, vigilance is the law. Orcs might retreat, but chaos does not. The corrupted guardsmen had vanished during the chaos, leaving only hints, the faint smell of warp-tainted oil, smeared glyphs on walls, and whispers that seemed to echo just beyond comprehension. Trooper Jorvan approached, his last gun slung over his shoulder, face streaked with soot and blood. He saluted, hesitant yet upright. "Commissar, the men, they're shaken." I studied him, noting how the boy had grown from trembling recruit to steady soldier under my watch. "Shaken is different from broken," I said. "Keep watch over them. Teach them the difference. Fear is useful only when it sharpens the mind, not crushes it." A group of medics called out from the makeshift infirmary. Among the wounded was Sergeant Harville, his arm seared by a chaos-corrupted last blast. Despite the pain, his eyes were calm, his hands working to keep the medici equipment steady. Competence in the face of suffering is as vital as any weapon. I nodded at him briefly. The man would survive, and more importantly, he would continue to inspire the regiment. Then the Vox channel sparked. A report came from the lower hab blocks. Another patrol had gone missing. And this time, they were not just men, they were officers. The colonel's face grew rigid. "Another patrol?" he asked. "How deep does this corruption run?" I did not answer immediately. Instead, I turned my gaze toward the ruined manufactoria below. That 8-point star had become a symbol not of chaos's presence alone but of its intent. Whoever dared defile our walls knew they could hide in shadows, strike unpredictably, and leave doubt in every man's heart. The threat was not just physical, it was psychological, a rot that could consume discipline faster than any orc horde. "Prepare a counter-patrol," I finally said. "I will go down personally. If this corruption festers, I will cut it out at the root. The Emperor does not suffer weakness, and neither will we." The colonel hesitated, torn between command protocol and the instinctive trust he placed in me. "Kalen, it's risky. You could be—" "I am a commissar," I interrupted. "I am meant to face what others fear. If I do not lead, we all die." A small contingent of guardsmen and one veteran sergeant accompanied me. The descent into the lower blocks was slow, deliberate. Every step echoed in corridors darkened by smoke and neglect. Flickering emergency lights revealed graffiti that made the stomach churn, blood symbols, crude runes, and footprints of something inhuman. A sudden scuttling noise echoed from a far corridor. The men froze, lasguns rising in unison. I felt the familiar tightening of the chest, the dread that precedes confrontation. And then, from the shadows, emerged a figure, half-formed, corrupted beyond recognition. Its eyes glowed faintly with warp-touched malice, and its limbs moved in unnatural angles. "Open fire!" I commanded, and the lasguns flared in unison. The first rounds caught it mid-motion, scorching flesh and warp energy alike. Still, it pressed forward, relentless. I stepped forward and fired my bolt pistol, the explosive rounds tearing through its warped torso with a deafening blast. The squad held formation, even as the creature shrieked in a voice that seemed to speak directly into their minds. "Fear," I barked. "Channel it into steel, not hesitation." When the creature finally collapsed, the corridors were silent again, save for our breathing and the faint hum of disrupted vox channels. Around us, the signs of corruption were undeniable, yet we had survived. Yet survival was not victory. I marked the area, noting each corrupted symbol for later purging. Each piece of evidence would be burned, destroyed, or used as a lesson. The war was not just against orcs, it was against chaos, suspicion, and the rot that takes root when men are left to fear the darkness without guidance. Back on the surface, I took a moment to look over the battlements. Smoke rose in columns from the battlefield, orc fires still burning in the distance. The men stared into the ruins, some in awe, some in horror. I knew they would remember this day, the day when the enemy they could see was only half the threat, and the enemy within was worse. The Emperor's hand may guide us, but mine delivers judgment. And soon, I would make the men understand that discipline is survival, and vigilance is justice. The next morning arrived with no fanfare, only the sickly orange haze of ash mingling with the first weak rays of the sun. The men moved with the exhaustion of living through yesterday's hell, but fatigue does not grant mercy in the 41st millennium. Every shift of armor, every adjustment of a last gun, every glance along the parapets carried the weight of survival. And behind it all, my eyes scanned relentlessly. The report came over the Vox with the kind of static-laden urgency that made your skin crawl. Another patrol had gone missing, this time from the eastern outworks. Not merely men, but supplies, communication relays, even small last cannon emplacements had been abandoned. I felt the weight of that realization like a lead gauntlet. Chaos was spreading, and it was bolder than ever. I assembled a counter-patrol immediately. Harville volunteered to lead a segment with me, shadowing him. Trooper Jorvan's eyes followed me with an intensity that spoke volumes. He had learned from my previous lessons, had internalized fear and discipline into a weapon. I gave no words of comfort. Words are wasted where vigilance is required. The descent into the lower levels was different this time. The air was thicker with the stench of warp corruption, acrid and sour. Every corner seemed to shift, as if the walls themselves had been twisted by some unseen hand. Auspex readings flickered, disrupted by whatever unnatural energies had rooted themselves in the hab blocks. I knew the enemy had become clever. They were no longer just using the shadows, they had become part of them. We found the first corpse in a stairwell, twisted grotesquely, last gun still clutched in a rigid hand. The 8-point star was branded across its chest. The signs were clear. This was not orc mischief. It was deliberate, ritualistic. The men behind me stiffened, and I allowed my voice to cut through the thick tension. Observe.